notes and then present a detailed lecture on every single surah that he would study. This was not something that you translate and keep going. He would spend hours and hours and hours on an ayah at a time if necessary. He decided that he's going to do this for the entire Quran. Actually, from what he said in one of his lectures, he started that project in 1976. Himself, he says the series is called Mufassal Darse Quran. That's what the name is in Urdu, Mufassal Darse Quran. So there's Bayanul Quran, which is the translation and quick dars, and then there's Mufassal Darse Quran, which is the detailed, deep, analytical study of Quran. I don't have access to it, except for 1/3 of it. 1/3 of it is recorded and posted online. I think the rest of it never saw the light of day, or he did it in his masjid, but it wasn't recorded or published or anything like that. But whatever he did do, let me tell you something about it. I developed that virus myself some time ago, that I'm going to study the entire Quran for myself in depth, and whatever surah I study, I'm going to go through 26, 27 different sources and properly study it before I talk about it. And he was one of my resources. So wallahi, I would study 20 different tafasir and grammatical analysis and the books of, this scholar and that scholar and the other scholar, and I would still have questions in my head. And then I'd listen to this man speak for 3-4 hours on the same question I had, and he would solve my problems like you're untying a knot. Incredible. Just the amount of work he put in, I appreciate. And it's a tragedy to me personally, it's a loss that he doesn't have every surah of Quran there, it's not posted. Subhanallah. But whatever he does have is an absolute treasure. Priceless. I haven't read anything in the Salaf, or even in later times by intellectuals, even though they have great contributions, that comes even close to solving the kinds of philosophical problems that he did, and the kinds of intellectual problems or historical analysis even. I mean, if you study his historical analysis, for example, of Inna Fatahna Laka Fathan Mubina, if you study his historical analysis and compare it to any other tafsir that you will study, you study tafsir, will be left with questions. You will be left with questions. And he was left with those questions, and he kept studying and researching until he found the answers to those questions and simplified them so one day a dummy like me can listen and understand. Of the many hundreds of thousands that listen and appreciate from his work. This was the second part, a deep study of the Quran, Tadabbur al-Quran. He unfortunately was not able to finish that series. Whatever he did do though, is posted on the Tanzeem's website. They've posted it. It's a great contribution. Inshallah ta'ala, I hope that one day it gets translated into English, because it is an absolutely priceless treasure of Quranic studies. Now his final contribution to Quranic studies. The title he liked to give this himself was Islamic Renaissance. He called this an Islamic Renaissance. And the idea he had was that the Quran is the most sophisticated document, not just from a religious point of view, but from a justice or domestic solutions, political solutions, economic solutions. You talk about any problem that exists in the world, the Quran is the most sophisticated document that has the solutions to it. And to present that to the world, is that easy, you think? To go to an economics professor and say, you know what? All the problems of modern economy, the solutions are right here in this book. Is that easy to do? It's not. And he said they'd probably laugh at you. If you do that, what are you talking about? You're just like those Christians who, Bible thumpers they call it, right? So he said in order to actually prove to the world that the Quran has the solutions to every problem humanity has ever faced, and has the guidelines to create and to live by the most harmonious society ever seen by history, what we need are scholars that have a deep study of the Quran on the one hand, and a deep study of one of the humanities on the other. And he used to talk a lot about how we are Muslims, specifically. Muslims are colonized. We were colonized, by the British and the French and the Spaniards or whatever else, right? But our lands were colonized before, but now our minds are colonized. When they left our minds as being colonized. What does that mean? That when you think about getting a good career, what do you think of? You think of some kind of technical science, or some kind of, medical, technical, financial, meaning you want to be a worker in the end. You want to serve the empire, right? And any education that doesn't have to do with being in a job or, technically doing labor, rather has to do with thought and deep reflection and thinking and intellectual pursuit. For example, sociology or history or political science. Or when you go into those careers, the Muslim parents will say, what are you wasting your time for? Why are you thinking about economics? What kind of job are you going to get? What are you going to do with sociology? What are you going to do with psychology? What are you going to do with anthropology or history? Useless stuff. And he says actually it is those sciences, they call them humanities. Those of you that are in college call them the useless courses, right? Those are the sciences that actually are the foundation of a society. The sociologists and the economists and the political scientists, these are the people who frame how society functions. Everybody else just works in it. But these are the people who craft society, who design society. I mean, look at the times in which we live in Wall Street and this and that and the other. It starts with Adam Smith, right? It starts with an economist. It starts with a writer. You know, you talk about the huge, Soviet Union and this amazing empire, but it starts somewhere else. It starts with a writer, with Karl Marx. It starts with a sociologist. Actually, he was a sociologist and an economist. So he says that Muslims have to be deep and very powerful intellectual sociologists, at the same time deep students of Quran, and bring these two together. And by bringing them together, you show the world how amazing the solutions of the Quran are for society. So instead of presenting the Quran as us versus them, it is us for them, if you understand what I'm saying. So here's a solution that will help you solve your problems. This is good for you. It's not even for me, it's good for you. And that's the amazing power that the Quran possesses. Now, in order to pursue this project, I told you, to pursue his first project, he did two things. Tarjuma al-Quran and Muntakhab Nisab, he did two things. For the deep study of Quran, he had his own project of, Mufassal Dars Quran. To pursue this third project, he took a risk. I want to tell you about this risk he took. He studied Islamic history and learned something. You know what he learned? He learned that Muslims, when they were in Spain, they were the head of world civilization. All the universities, all the intellectual heads were where? They were under Muslim rule. And the Europeans were in the Dark Ages. So how did the Europeans make a comeback? You cannot have a comeback until you have scholarship. You can't do it. The reason the Western world is at the head of the planet today. Why are they leaps and bounds ahead of everybody else? Because they have the most sophisticated universities than anybody else. The centers of learning are also centers of society and centers of civilization. The Muslims were the places where universities were, and we were also leaders of the world. So how did the Europeans make a comeback? Where did they send their young men? Where did they send their young blood? To the Muslim universities. And they were taking a big risk, because if the Europeans go to Muslim universities, they might become Muslim and we might lose them. So this was a big risk for the Europeans, because they might lose some of their freshest talent to the Muslims. But these Europeans went, a lot of them were lost to Islam from their point of view. We gained them, they lost them. But a good number of them learned what they had to learn and went back to Europe to make Europe a better place. And thus started the Enlightenment. They started translating. The works of the philosophers were gone. They were only available in Arabic. The Greek philosophers, you couldn't find the Greek text, you could only find the Arabic text. So the Europeans came, translated them back into European languages and took them back with them. So this reversal, right? He says now it's time where the Muslims have to come to Western universities, gain the highest form of knowledge, and then return that intellectual tradition to the Muslim world. That was his idea, and for that purpose he started an experiment. It was called IQW, Institute of Quranic Wisdom, and one of the projects within that was called the Higher Studies Project. It's one of the tragedies in his life, that project. It was called the Higher Studies Project. The purpose of it was he would have some young brothers that would go and study with him in Pakistan, and they would study the Quran and Arabic and all of this stuff, and when he felt confident with them, he would ship them off to the United States, and they would do higher studies here, do their PhD in sociology or history or whatever else. And he did do that. There were a number of brothers, I actually knew them personally myself, and they learned under him, and then they came back here and they joined Hartford Seminary, they went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they went to different universities, and guess what ended up happening with most of them? They lost the other side. Or their ideas completely changed. And what he intended completely backfired. It completely backfired. I know of one exception. I know of one exception of his 24 students that I knew that engaged in this project, and he was actually hoping that I would be one of those volunteers, but I said I'll stay in LSP. It was HSP, Higher Studies Project. I wanted to be LSP. Lower studies. I was actually more fascinated with his Tadabbur al-Quran work. And I said, I don't have the brain cells for the Higher Studies Project and that idea. It was a little, even when they would talk about it, I was like, what? What are you talking about? You know? It's a remarkable idea. It really is. But we didn't have the infrastructure or the wherewithal to be able to execute that idea. I don't take merit away from that idea. It's a profound idea. It's an amazing idea. But we have to have a proper strategy to be able to execute it. He did whatever he could within his human capacity to fulfill that idea, and may Allah accept that from him. And that great concern for the ummah. It's actually, for those of you that are interested, read this book. It's amazing reading. He wrote this, it's hard for me to believe he wrote this in 1965, when he was like 24. He wrote this when he was 24. It's called Islamic Renaissance, The Real Task Ahead. Read it twice. It's like maybe 40, 50 pages. But it'll blow your mind. If you're a serious reader, first of all, it'll blow your mind that this guy is not like an Englishman, and he's writing this sophisticated language. It's sophisticated language. Most Islamic books are written in poor English. This is good English. This is English that'll make you feel bad. Like I should have paid more attention in English class in high school English, right? And second of all, it's just, the ideas in it are extremely powerful, very potent ideas.